Hey guys, it's Michael with Total Physical Therapy, and today the purpose of this video is to help you become more informed and educated in understanding your coverage for physical therapy through your health insurance, how to determine what your upfront costs are going to be, and how you can use that to your advantage in understanding how to select facilities that meet your needs. Before we get to some of the details of this, we first have to understand some basics of insurance terminology, and we're going to start right now with premiums and deductibles. Now, a premium is going to be your monthly cost or your employer's monthly cost just to simply own the policy. So each and every month as those premiums are paid, you simply have the opportunity within that window of using that policy. So whether you use it or not, those costs are going out the door automatically for the cost of those premiums. That brings us to deductibles. A deductible is a set dollar amount that you have to pay before your plan will execute its coverage. So this is a set amount . A set dollar amount that you have to pay out of pocket before your policy will cover their percentage of your allowed medical expenses. Now, traditionally speaking, these two concepts have an inverse relationship. And what I mean by this is that typically for policies with a very expensive premium, those same policies that cost more per month to own a right to utilize are typically going to have very little to no deductible. Okay, so there's an inverse relationship there of a very high premium cost with a marginal to no deductible responsibility for you. And vice versa, policies that typically have a very cheap premium or a low monthly cost typically have exponentially larger deductibles. So while a policy might not cost much on a monthly basis to own, when you actually have to execute and utilize that policy, you're typically going to have very high or expensive deductibles. Okay, so now that we understand the elementary difference between a premium and a deductible, and we realize that they are typically inversely related to each other in terms of cost, let's talk about two major concepts within a plan called co-insurance and co-pays. So with co-insurance is basically a percentage of your allowed charges that are going to be covered by your insurance versus what you're going to be responsible for. Now, in the traditional plan, many plans including Medicare, they have a 80-20 coverage or considered an 80-20 policy. And what this is going to mean is that 80% of those allowed charges are going to be covered by the insurance group, leaving you, the beneficiary, with the responsibility of paying the remainder 20%. Now, some other details are going to go into from one policy to the next, but just in general, so you understand the difference, realize that in 80-20 policy, your insurance will pick up 80% of the tab, leaving you with the remaining 20%. Now, the idea of secondary insurances and supplemental insurances are going to be reserved for a more in-depth other video, but we're going to keep it simple here. Now, while I said this is a traditional policy, we can also have policies that are 70-30, 60-40, and so forth. And so as you can see, doing the simple math, these relationships are going to equal one whole or 100%, where the top numbers are typically indicative of what your insurance is going to cover, and the bottom percentage is typically what you will owe. All right, so We will come back to coinsurance later and see how your charges for physical therapy are going to be influenced with coinsurance plans based on the amount that you'll owe out of pocket. But let's move on to copays. So as opposed to coinsurance, a copay is a set dollar amount. This does not fluctuate. It does not change from one visit to the next or from one provider or one facility to the next. This is going to be a set dollar amount that you'll pay each and every time. So let's take an example. If you have a copay of $30 per day, you know no matter where you go, as long as that facility is within network of your insurance policy, that you would be responsible for $30 a day out of your pocket, and your insurance will cover the rest of the bill. So a copay is very different from coinsurance, understanding that this is a set dollar amount, whereas coinsurance can fluctuate based on the services that you receive. Another key concept with a copay is that oftentimes we find that a deductible does not apply. What this simply means is that if you have a deductible on your policy, say that deductible is $5,000 deductible, this would be an example of one of those high deductible plans which probably has a very low monthly premium cost. Let's say that your plan has a $5,000 deductible, but specifically for physical therapy. This is going to vary from one specialty to the next within the clauses of your insurance policy. So it's always important to not just look at it in broad terms, but to be able to differentiate between one provider to the next. But we'll take an example of a $5,000 deductible that for physical therapy simply has a $30 copay. And if the deductible does not apply, that simply means that physical therapy would be reimbursed by your insurance policy, leaving you with a mere $30 a day, not having to worry about this $5,000 deductible. Other plans may apply the deductible, and so that you just have to dig into the finer workings of your policy to determine that. If you're not comfortable doing that, then any great facility like Total would do that on your behalf. Try to obtain that information from your insurance carrier. Okay, so we've differentiated the difference between a coinsurance and a copay. We're going to touch base back on that coinsurance concept. Now, when we're talking about coinsurance, we're going to have to identify and recognize how physical therapy is actually billed to you. Well, to bill physical therapy, facilities in an outpatient basis are going to have to bill CPT codes. Now, there's tens of thousands of these CPT codes.
They exaggerate.
So sometime in your vacation or your downtime, we simply encourage you to pick up that book and start memorizing all 10,000 codes.
They exaggerate.
All jokes aside, there is a very simple solution for this, and that is Google. Okay, you can simply identify what these CPT codes are by plugging them into our good old-fashioned web browsers. Now, you may ask, why do I even need to know these? And my argument is that because a lot of the times, both the bills from medical providers as well as EOBs from insurance policies simply list these CPT codes. And these CPT codes are numerical codes. So I'm going to use two simple examples. Now, on a first date of service, your physical therapist is likely to have billed an evaluation code. Now, there's 3 of these that you might have to spot, but we'll keep it simple for demonstration, and we'll just say one of the most common codes utilized is the reflection of the numbers 97162. And again, this would be a physical therapy evaluation. Now, you may or may not have alpha character descriptions for what that code is on your EOBs or on your medical bills. I say this because we've seen it. We've seen this with some of our own medical bills in our own families, where these are listed out, but you have to go to Google and search and find what these things are, knowing that these are a reflection of billing codes. Another example. Now, through a majority of physical therapy offices, anybody that's been involved with this profession, you know that one of the characteristic staples of interventions would be some form of exercise. And as such, we do have a numeric character, 97110, to indicate that therapeutic exercise was delivered. So now we can understand that these numeric characters are representative of what was actually provided during your sessions. Now, some of these codes, particularly this one in this example, they are timed. So what this means is it means that those codes are also going to have an indicator called a unit. A unit is a specified measure of time that a provider will have spent on any given intervention. Now, I mention units because you will oftentimes on your bills and your EOBs, you'll find that these CPT codes also have a designating unit marker to suggest what length of time was spent. So an example of this might be on any given date of service, 97110 might appear on your bills and EOBs, but they also might have an indicator unit of 2, 3, and so forth. So what this would mean is that 2 units of that given intervention has been billed to your insurance. So it is unfortunately not a simple one unit listing of any given intervention in a date of service, so it gets a little confusing, and it could be listed a couple different ways. Your EOBs and your medical bills might list it something similar to this, or they might have a code column, and they might have a unit column listed like this. We might have another interventions that is listed something like this. This would just indicate that 2 units of that code and 1 unit of this code were billed to your insurance. Now, without getting too technical and lost in all the technicalities of this, just take home the idea and the concept that you're going to have numerical characters indicating the interventions listed in number of units for your total bill. Okay, so now that we've covered some of the basics of CPT codes and you understand that these codes are placed into the numeric language for insurance companies, and you know how to identify what those are and how many units of those are provided, let's get into the nuts and bolts of this and understand how this ultimately at the bottom line affects you. So let's say on day 1, your charges for physical therapy looked something like this, where 2 units of this modality and this unit of this modality were provided, and you ultimately came out with a dollar cost. Okay? But on day 2, you received a little bit different interventions. It might have seemed similar to you, but those were delivered in a little bit different way, and you might have had a completely different bill for that date of service. And you might ask, well, what changed? We did the same thing. My bill should be the exact same. The truth is, it is going to depend on these individual charges and how many of those charges are submitted for each given day. So in understanding how your bill can fluctuate from one day to the next, you can take these relationships if you have a co-insurance plan and understand how if you have a traditional 20% patient responsibility, that 20% might be different from day 1 to day 2, day 3, and so forth. So where does price transparency come into play? Well, for great facilities, we consider ourselves to be one of those facilities. We take those tens of thousands of CPT codes and we condense them into a small pocket, a pocket of comfort for us to render excellent care, but still on your behalf be able to provide you with a great estimate of what those charges are going to be. And so we don't have a hodgepodge of codes that we're going to bill to your insurance. We have a few isolated select codes. Now, this means that we don't do a lot of interventions that some facilities might use. You might be able to go to physical therapy ABC and XYZ and receive different types of interventions, but those are going to leave that facility in a guessing game as to what your actual costs are going to be on a visit-to-visit basis, because there's so much fluctuation. And we know this still exists, and we feel the frustrations just like you when we call certain facilities and we ask what estimated financial responsibilities are going to be, and they simply just say it depends on what's done. Well, we just don't agree with that approach. There's nothing wrong with it from a standpoint of how you render care, but we just feel like it's more of a disvalue to you, the consumer, trying to understand what you're actually purchasing. Okay, you understand some of the basic language of your insurance and how that's going to reflect on what your patient responsibility is. You understand that physical therapy is delivered in intervention codes that are going to be reflected with numeric characters that have units. And you've loosely put all this together, but you're still a little hazy, you're still a little confused. And there's one more aspect that I want to bring forth to your attention, and that is this: contract pricing. Now, if you're seeking care through a provider or a facility that you have identified as being in network with your insurance, you need to understand that contract pricing, that is the pricing of that service or those services with that insurance and that provider, can and do differ from one facility to the next.
Say it ain't so.
Sir, we have a situation here.
You certainly do.
So let's pretend you're considering 3 different facilities. You're considering total physical therapy. That should be end of story, end of deal. But in all honesty, you're considering multiple locations. We encourage people to consider multiple locations, not just because of price, but because of the delivery of their therapy. But coming back to contract pricing, all 3 of these facilities may be in network with your insurance, but there may be 3 completely different price fee schedules amongst those facilities. And to not get into too deep of the waters, if we were to consider the fact that therapy ABC might be a hospital-based facility and therapy XYZ might be a physician-owned practice, and then total, we are an independent physical therapist-owned facility, so we are in what is considered the private sector, the price fluctuations could differ tremendously, and they do differ tremendously.
Say it ain't so.
So you might get the even exact same quality of care, and you might get the exact same interventions and be responsible for 2 very different bills from facility A, at total being a private institution, versus facility B, which might be a hospital-based institution. So we bring this to light because it is something for you to understand that that is one of the bottom lines for your out-of-pocket expenses. So I hope you found this information useful. I know there's tons of questions surrounding this topic, and we have tons of answers. We deal with this on a daily basis. We're very well voiced in this. We are going to give you price transparency within a few dollars with policies that we deal with on a routine basis. And if it is a weird, obscure insurance policy that we've never seen, we will do our best to obtain that information. and get you out the door costs for what your responsibilities are going to be. That leaves you with questions. Feel safe. There are lots of questions to answer. Just comment down below. Send us your questions. I'd be happy to answer. If you found this video useful, be sure to share it with others so they can better understand how physical therapy is actually billed and how that affects your bottom dollar costs.